Hello, hello, hello. It's Cruellica Kain here again with
Advent Nebula here tonight.
And we are doing a special episode of Pop Culture Therapy. We're not going to really get into the world as it's been going on. We'll save that for next week because I want to digest some television moments that have come up and news.
Also, we'll want to digest before Denver Pop Culture Con with that coming up that weekend too.
So I figure we're going to be probably having a number of videos coming up, or a number of podcasts coming up in the next week, just talking about things that are going on. So you're probably going to see a little bit more activity of us than normal, but we promise we'll go back to our regular schedule not too long after.
It will be a bombardment with Denver Pop Culture Con, not only with stuff we're bringing up with next week's podcast, but also interviews.
Yes.
If we can get any kind of interview request in from you guys in the comments, that'd be great. We can try for any of the guests that are on the authors or comic book artists or just general artists there. Any of the big names, probably not going to happen.
Well, we do have Colleen Klinkenbeard.
Yes, that is probably the biggest one we have so far for an on-camera interview.
Yes, but we'll try to share it podcast-wise as well, as much as we can. So, with that said, let's get into our special topic that we've been promising for a while. And this is our individual, each of us, and we have not shared them between the two of us, our top 10 anime series from the 90s.
Yeah, and with this, we don't know what it is for either of us. Some of these series are more than likely going to be pretty mainstream. Others, you're probably not going to be able to find through any kind of licensing means, except for the occasional stream on some of these. Others of these, you're going to be looking in secondhand stores to find some of these titles.
Some of these titles you'll either look at secondhand stores or, like Advent Nebula said, streaming or eBay.
Yeah.
eBay would be, for a couple of the titles I know that are personally going to be on my list, which I'm actually hoping they get re-released at some point because of the 90s nostalgia factor coming back into play.
Yeah, I'm looking at mine. I have one that's completely out of print and two that have yet to get an official Blu-ray release yet, but one is getting one soon, from what I know.
I have two series on my list that have never been dubbed into English. One of which has been dubbed into English, but a very poor English version. And the other one, I don't think it'll ever get dubbed into English, and it's kind of sad for me. So let's start off. Now, before we get into this, let's go through a quick top 10 of Kaijin Okami's.
Yes.
Just because this will be we're not going to go into anything, and there's no actual order for his, because he was like, oh, you should just name my favorites. So his favorite 90s anime, if you ever get a chance to check these out, I would definitely recommend them. You have Big O, Revolutionary Girl Utena, Silent Mobius, which is out of print, but you can find some copies online.
Usually eBay will have the occasional full set that Bandai released come up, but otherwise it's in licensing limbo and nobody knows if it's ever going to be coming back.
I think it will. I think it's a popular enough series that it should. Next he has Cowboy Bebop, Escaflowne, Tekkaman Blade, which I don't know, which is not out of print, but
very, very hard to find.
It is very hard to find, but I believe you can find it online for streaming. Then you have Outlaw Star, which, just like Cowboy Bebop and Escaflowne, have been recently, and Utena, have been recently released in America on Blu-ray. Victory Gundam, which you can find on Right Stuff, Sailor Moon, and Turn A Gundam. So, now that I've gotten him out of the way, and I've done my due diligence as his wife, Advent Nebula, tell me your number 10 90s anime.
My number 10 is a tournament, martial arts, and political intrigue series. Came out in the mid-90s, did not get an official U.S. release until the mid-2000s by ADV, who's now defunct, and the license has expired and it's out of print. If you find it, it's only going to be as individual 6 DVD volumes on eBay, or you're going to be having to go try and find it somewhere on the internet. I'm sure people are very well aware on how they can find it. That's Shadow Skill.
Shadow Skill. Oh my god, I have not heard of that show in forever.
Yeah, I've loved the show. The way it sets up with the first half being about the siblings discovering their martial art techniques. The main character, she's striving to be the best, with her brother being this one who's looking to be somebody underneath her, but at the same time become his own person, and their mentor who gets wrapped up in the political intrigue of the world, that building that's been set up. Recently rewatched the show about 5 months ago, and it ended up holding up for me. Wasn't as good as I remember, so it got kind of bumped to number 10 on this list, but I still do enjoy the show. Now, there is a 2-episode OVA that was released by Manga Entertainment, and I really don't recommend it because it just takes 2 stories from the very, very first volume of the manga, the first chapter and the third chapter, and that's all it was adapted, and then the cringy English dub that Manga Entertainment did with the British cast just throws you out of, like, what am I watching?
I can appreciate that. That kind of reminds me of when I rewatched Dirty Pair. I still love Dirty Pair. That's an anime series, mainly from the 80s, but is in the 90s, and I'm not going to go too much into it, but kind of similar in its style. But yeah, I haven't heard Shadow Skill in forever. And that's the kind of the reason why we did the secretive list, is because we're going to be talking about shows that are like, oh, that existed? So my number 10, mainly because I am so hard at rating series, is actually one of the few true fantasy series. And when I think of fantasy, I think of like the medieval era type fantasy, where it's very old school, very classical, where you have elves. It's basically playing D&D, but watching it in cartoon form. And that for me is Record of Lodoss War.
Wow, and that ended up as my number 11 when I was putting the list together.
Trust me, I have many that I took off. Half the list that I read for Kaiji no Kami was later for me as well. So basically, Record of Lodoss War, if you have not seen the OVA series, which I absolutely recommend, it's about 12 episodes in length. 12
episodes. Each episode's 45 minutes also.
Yes, which basically it's a 26 episode series, just fairly long, and it's truly that medieval D&D type style where you have elves, you have the ancient world of Lodoss, and it's political intrigue. It's basically a band of 6 young champions led by the main character Parn, and they have to fight this new threat that is planning on taking over and destroying their entire world. It sounds so simplistic when you talk about it, but the way the character development is, the way the animation was done, because compared to a lot of the other series that are even higher up on my list, this is the one of the few OVAs that came out in the 90s that did not follow the cut and paste animation style of 90s anime.
Yeah, it really wasn't until its sequel, Chronicles of the Heroic Knight, which was a TV sequel to the OVAs, where it ended up following that.
And I recommend it. It's still available. It's so beloved that I don't think it'll ever go out of print.
Funimation License rescued this last year, released the OVA on Blu-ray and the Chronicles of the Heroic Knight with it on DVD. There's a re-release, cheaper price, coming out at the end of August this year if you want to hold on and get at a lower price.
Yes, that's a good point. You can get it at a reasonable price, but however you get a chance to watch it, if you have not watched Record of Lodoss War, I would definitely recommend it. It's something that, at least for me, and this is probably why it's so low on my list, is it's not my cup of tea anime, so I don't always go out of my way and gravitate towards it as the first thing I need to watch.
And little interesting history on this show. It started out actually as a group of friends playing D&D, and the dungeon master, who is the author of the light novels, wrote the light novels based on the actual D&D games him and his group of friends had.
And I think that's why it feels so legitimately like a D&D game, because it really plays where you have to go through this epic. You always are going to go into these different arenas, different agendas, and it doesn't play paint by numbers anime.
Yeah, it really feels like a medieval Western fantasy show as opposed to an anime series. And I think that's why it has held up in the West in such regard still to this day.
Oh, absolutely. So what is your number 9?
My number 9 is a show that is on Kaiju no Kami's list. And that's Big O. Which still to this day, despite the ambiguous ending, despite some of the issues people have had, the neo-noir setting of Paradigm City, what goes on with Roger Smith and Dorothy, still holds up for me. This is another one I rewatched recently, and I'm still floored on how good it is. The animation was done by the same studio who did Batman the Animated Series in the 90s, and it holds up today. The animation just is gorgeous to look at. The storytelling, as ambiguous at times it is, and with the questions you're still left with as you're watching the show, you realize it's going to be a show where you're not going to get all the answers that you're looking for, but it still satisfies in a way as you're going through this series.
Absolutely. And the other hard part about Big O, and I think this is why it didn't really hit my list immediately, is because you can't explain the series.
No, you have
could say
to experience
Roger. You have to experience, because you could say main characters Roger Smith and Dorothy, and you have the Big O. Okay, what's the story about? It's so immersive and it's so visceral in its explanation. There's no way you can say, well, they do this, they have to fight a big bad, because if you say, well, they're going against the government, or they're going against this big bad type villain,
or even the conspiracy theorists that are thrown out in the series,
it takes away from actually the power of it, because it's a man against a villain. Actually, it's not. It's a man against machine. Actually, there's so many things that you could say it's man versus something, and yes, you can prove it, but in the next episode, you will disprove everything you thought you knew about the show.
And this is a show with it was originally planned to be 39 episodes, only got 26 made, and the first season came out in 99, the second season came out in 2003, and it's best watching the first 13 episodes straight through. I'd recommend taking about a week
to
process everything, and then go in and watch the second season all in one sitting for the last 13 episodes. That way you have everything fresh in your mind with the way the story's going, and then you're going, either going to go, that was a mindfuck, or, okay, I love this series.
Well, and the other great thing about this particular show is, if it wasn't for us Americans, the show would have never been completed, because Japan did not get it.
Yeah.
And that's not a knock against them culturally. It's just this show was made with the American mindset of conspiracy theories, of noir, of intrigue, so focused in mind that it took a while for the Japanese audiences to catch on.
Yeah, Japan's just now, 20 years later, learning to appreciate this show, where this one took off in America immediately.
Oh, yes.
And the creator of the show, very big fan of neo-noir film from Europe and America from the mid-70s to the mid-80s. And you watch the show and you can feel it, too.
Oh, absolutely. So, my number 9 series is basically kind of the ultimate version of a 90s anime. It definitely encompasses the ridiculousness that came out in 90s anime. It's basically, the general premise is, what do you do in a world where all women have gone extinct? But it's not a yaoi series. It's so far, and it's, I think mainly because anime really didn't go into that direction in the 90s.
Yeah.
They had it, but it was so beyond subtle. So this show is called Saber Marionette J. There's 3 Saber Marionette series, but this is the original.
Which, probably the best of the 3, because the second one is a half filler, and the third one, it feels like they were taking from what was set in the second season with its filler, plus the original material.
Absolutely. And I kind of think this series, because the main character, his name is Otaru, and he finds 3 female androids that were made in the past that he was able to refurbish and bring back to life. You have Lime, you have Cherry, and you have Bloodberry. And basically, they're all different elements of a female character. You have Lime, who's that happily, bubbly type girl. That's pretty common in main characters. Then you have Cherry, that's more of the seductress. And then you have Bloodberry, who's more of the serious or the stronger female type character. And it's so funny because it's all men. And it's been men for a long time. And I still don't know. I know how they keep on going. But it's kind of like that American movie, I think it was American, or that live action movie, Child of Man.
Yeah, Children of Men.
Children of Men. And it kind of reminded me of that, where it's been so long since a woman existed that when these women come out there, it's not like a reverse harem or anything. It's a comedy series where they have to figure out how to handle being around anything that's feminine. Because even their Shakespearean type things, there are no feminine characters even in the male population. And it's so hilarious. Every time I've watched this show, I have died laughing because it's ridiculous. Sadly, it's out of print unless you don't mind spending a little bit more money and buying it on eBay, or there are ways of seeing it online.
Yeah, this is a show I doubt, because it wasn't too popular here in America with Bandai's release on it. Hell, Bandai ended up changing the dubcast for every season.
I know!
And from what my understanding is, it was trying to get the show to click, but it just never worked. So this is one I have a feeling will never get another license attempt here in America.
And that's kind of the disappointing part of it, because even if you read the manga for it, the manga is great, but there's something so much more experienced when you watch certain shows in anime form versus manga, because you can get the humor and the fun in it, but when you have the anime, it's just so more lively and energetic.
Yeah, it's one of those shows that I've only really gotten a chance to watch it once, and it was through a friend. And I've never been able to watch it again just because it's out of print and he doesn't live around me close enough that I could actually borrow it from him again.
Yeah, when I used to work in a library back in the 90s, in the early 2000s, one of my coworkers and we would trade back our Saber Marionette J DVDs along with Ranma, just because we'd constantly watch those shows. So if you ever get a chance, it's hilarious, and I would definitely recommend it.
Now for my number 8. It would be the one I would call the foundation for isekai anime that we have just booming up today. Escaflowne. Now, for Kaiju no Kami, if you ever ask him about Escaflowne, he'll say it's his 3rd favorite anime of all time.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. For me, it's my 8th pick of the 90s. It's in my top 10 overall in anime. And I just love it. And it's one of those series that, because isekai's become so popular and all the tropes, a lot of modern audiences going back and looking at Escaflowne today aren't going to experience and understand just how original this series was when it came out in 1997. Vaughn is one of my favorite male leads, and the mech designs for Escaflowne is just beyond phenomenal. And on top of it, the Landau is probably one of the craziest villains that has one of the most amazing plot twists when you get to the last half of the show you'll ever experience, because even when you watch modern isekai that's going on today, it's one that you do not see coming with all the tropes. because this was such a 90s thing with what they do in the latter half of the show. Political intrigue as well in this series with vying for a crown and kingdom, and a megalomaniac of a main villain that you really don't understand his intentions till the very last episode.
You really don't. And it's one of those shows that, admittedly, compared to Advent and Kaiju, it took me about 2-3 viewings to actually kind of like Utena in a way, to really say, you know, this is pretty good. I enjoy it. It's one of those series that you have to be, well, for me at least, you have to be in the right frame of mind.
Yeah, you have to be in the right frame of mind if you're not a fan of these type of shows to actually enjoy this show. Because there's a lot of plot threads going on that do not get tied up until the last 2 episodes.
Well, exactly. And Escaflowne is one of those shows that you have to be committed to watch. You can't just watch a couple episodes, not watch for like a few months, go back to it. You have to have commitment and just stick through it. Maybe watching like 5 or 6 episodes in a day, and then like a couple days later watching more. Because if you take a long break, and I think this is what happened to me the first time I watched it, it was such a long break in between the first 2 halves, and I was still in college, so I lost all point of it. But no, I definitely would recommend that series. And it's gotten a new treatment. You'll have some purists out there for Escaflowne that will say we will only watch the original dub that came out in the 90s. But it does have a brand new dub. And I think a lot of the voice actors definitely match how I felt the characters should have sounded.
For me, I've watched both dubs.
Same.
I prefer the Funimation dub, not only because it feels and flows more natural, but the translation actually makes it so the plot threads that are so needed to understand the end of the series actually work. I don't know who did Bandai's translation in the 90s, but they didn't do a justice for 2 major plot threads that it ends up, you're going, huh? During the last couple of episodes.
Oh, yeah. And fun fact, for years, even though Kaiju Okami loves the show, for years we kept on calling it Escaflonasal spray. And we actually wanted to do a commercial about it. Just like that, because it was perfect. On
to your number 7.
So I have this, I just thought about when I said that Record of Lodoss War was like my true fantasy, because then I'm going to my number 8 choice, which is the most ridiculous fantasy series. And I say fantasy using quotations because this is what I think of when I think of like kooky, fan service, and hunger at the same time.
Yeah, all the characters are named after food, because I just got a glimpse of what your number 7 is.
So my number 8.
Oh yeah, it's your number 8.
Number 8 series is Sorcerer Hunters. Basically, Sorcerer Hunters is this which really got popular in the 90s, where you have a fantasy series that's supposed to take place in a mystical world, but has so many modern things that pop up that really became popular in the 90s and stick through now. Because there's another series on my list that kind of does that at the same time. But Sorcerer Hunters is about, basically, for a general explanation, it's set on this special continent called Spooner, where you have 2 different types of groups. You have the ordinary people, or parsoners, and you have the magic users, who are sorcerers. The magic users have this overseer. Her name is Big Mama, and trust me, she is a big mama.
Oh yeah.
And it's 100% comedy. You have the main character, his name is Carrot, and he does eat a lot like his namesake. And he has his younger brother, I say younger, but he looks like he's 10 years older. Younger brother, Marin, who is so flamboyant. It's hilarious.
Yeah, Marin, you're just like, okay, will you bed one of these guys soon?
Thank you. And then you have twin sisters, Tira and Chocolate.
Who, I swear, those outfits should not be allowed in public.
No, because Chocolate, I think it's Chocolate.
Chocolate just wears suspenders covering her boobs.
Yeah, she has suspenders. And then you have Mocha as their other member. So you have 2 brothers, 2 sisters, and Mocha. And Mocha, I think of, is kind of like Jet in a way from Cowboy Bebop. That
he's the straight man.
He's the straight man. He's like that fatherly figure, even though he's relatively the same age. But he tries to keep them going down the same path, because you have Marin, who is flamboyant. You have Carrot, who's basically Monkey D. Luffy. I think that's why he's my favorite character.
And trying to bed the twins.
And the twins are obsessed. And it's hard to give this show any kind of, like, explanation, because think of, like, Sayuki, or think of, so many other series in the 90s, and this is very common for the shorter, like Trouble Chocolate is another series that does it. There is that underlying plot that goes throughout the series, but it's so simplistic. You could watch it, unlike Escaflowne, you could watch one episode today, watch another episode 3 weeks from now, and still get the same humor and not miss a thing.
Yeah, and the light novel this is originally based on, which there are some fan translations of some of the novels, it's the same way. You could read one novel, and then it'll be like 4 or 5 later on, that's your next translated one of the novels, or even with the manga. There's an underlying plot thread of something bigger going on, but it's pretty much standalone.
It is standalone. And the only thing I would critique for this particular series is Carrot is a huge perv. He, like you said, wants to bed everyone. Same with his brother, but still, his brother's at least a little bit more responsible. Nevertheless, though, it does have crass humor. It does have things that you may not like because it's really not there in modern series.
Yeah.
So be aware of that. It isn't out of print, but it's not been released on DVD, on Blu-ray. It's only been released on DVD.
The last DVD release, apparently it still has a license by Section 23, which is NAPA, which is what ADV became, but they have not re-released it in a while. Apparently the license is expiring at the end of this year. Section 23 with having no current re-releases. Don't know if they're going to license renew it. We don't know if somebody else is going to pick it up.
I would hope that Funimation or Right Stuff do.
If anybody's going to pick up this series after its license expires from Section 23 at the end of the year, I'd guess it'd be Nozomi/Right Stuff would be the one that would pick it up.
Yeah, that's who I think would pick it up.
Or Discotek would take a chance on it.
Yeah, Discotek or Media Blasters as well. But it's definitely well worth a watch. It's hilarious because there's so many series, including that I still have on my list, that you have on your list, that take a lot of thought, that take a lot of energy. You need to have those shows, and the 90s is so good for it, that just gives you a chance to have fun and not think.
Yeah.
So what is your number 7?
My number 7 is Tekmen Blade. Which, the best way to describe Tekmen Blade, if you've never seen it, and you're a Toku fan, you're going to love this series, because it's like watching an animated Toku. A family goes into space on a research mission, and ends up getting transformed by aliens into superpowered humans that are able to transform into Tekmen. The main character ends up fighting his brother and gets launched onto Earth and is found by some scientists, and then is fighting his way through as the Earth's getting ravaged by the creatures that were on the spaceship that they were originally out to investigate, that they got lost on a few years before. And Earth's decimated. There's an orbital elevator that's encircling the planet that has just been taken over and overrun by them. And it's a game of survival at this point for Earth. And Blade is the one who's tasked with this, and his family, as you find out very early on, are the other Tekmen that he has to fight. Yep. And they're the ones that are in control of the aliens. And it's a story of rivalry between family that just really hits really hard as you're going on, as this series escalates the stakes.
And being a mech series that's not Gundam, that actually mainly it's really not Gundam.
Yeah, it's basically not even a mech series. It's more of like a animated Kamen Rider is the best way to describe it.
No, that's a very good way of describing it, as anime Kamen Rider. They have mechs because of their suits, but I would think of it like Kamen Rider, Ultraman, Garo, because of its adult themes. This show, I think, the reason why I compare it to mech with Gundam, even though I would say it's probably closer to like Code Geass or Rosavan, with being different because it's more visceral, is actually Garo would be the best example.
Garo would be the closest example of a Toku show that this represents, and this series is a reboot of a 70s show.
Yep.
And this one just took the camp and the humor that the 70s one had and turned it into a dark tale of saving the Earth and against all odds.
You really do see the tragedy with it. You do see the heartbreak, but you also see how he almost, for Blade, he creates his own new family.
Yeah.
Creates his base, and you see the betrayal. You see all these emotions, but at the end of the day, you also see the strength of will.
Yes.
And that is a rare, like, my list is probably going to be much, much funnier than Advent Nebula's. But the one thing I really love about this particular series that was my number 11 is the fact that this is a show that I have watched so many times and I don't get bored with.
You don't, and it's a show, if you're going to go watch the show, because it is 51 episodes, there are 4 recap episodes. I recommend if you're going to go through it, get to the point before a recap episode comes up from looking at any of the online episode descriptions, and stop there, take a little break, watch the recap episode, go on through the next stretch before the next recap episode, because those recap episodes are kind of like a break for you to process everything that's been going on in the show.
Now, that's a really good point. And I imagine that's actually what they probably intend recap episodes to be. But it gets so frustrating when you're watching a 26-episode series and there's 4 recaps.
Yeah, this one being
Destiny.
50. Yeah, this one being 51 episodes, having 4 recaps. But I will say the last recap episode is very integral because it takes from the point of view of one of the villain characters on everything that's going on.
Oh, yeah, I forgot. It does flip it on its hat there.
That last recap episode, because there's only 5 episodes left of the series when this recap episode happens, but you get to see everything from the main villain's point of view of everything that's gone on before, and you actually get a few tidbits of story information that you didn't know about that is original to that episode.
That is a good point. I own it still, thankfully. It is not out of print.
It's not out of print officially, but Media Blasters no longer has the license anymore. So if you're gonna find a copy of the DVDs, you're probably gonna pay out the wazoo for the sets. Now, the Tekkaman version that was released in the 90s, which is the all ages version that omits all but the one recap episode that's told from the villain's point of view, that's still in print and is easier to find, but it's dub only and there are name changes which might irritate some people.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that because I've only seen the original, so I remember the Tekkaman being that there were 2 different versions, but
yeah, you can still find, if you're gonna find the subtitle version that's in Japanese only, that's going to be the harder one to find. You're having an easier time finding the Americanized version.
But there are ways to find it online as well. Obviously, we're not promoting anything nefarious, and we recommend everyone do what's the best thing for the economy and people, and there's themselves.
Media Blasters did do a really good job with this release when they did it about 6 years ago.
Oh, yeah, they did. And I imagine kind of with the push for more adult-themed animes, I wouldn't be surprised if it gets a re-release or something like that.
And like I said, the Americanized dub version is always going to be in print if you're looking for it. It's not bad, but the violence is toned down. You have 3 of the recap episodes cut from it, and because of some of the editing of the violence, a few of the episodes are kind of crunched together at times because it's only 46 episodes instead of 51.
Well, my next series is actually a remake from a series in the 80s. And it's kind of the first Girls with Guns series I've watched. It takes place in a futuristic world where you have robots called boomers destroying things, and they go on rampages.
And the funny thing about that is a mistranslation that's stuck in the English scripts because they are called boomers in Japanese.
And it's basically because it's people against the corporation. It's kind of, I would say it's very similar to Ghost in the Shell in a way, but
it's more
very different. But it's called Bubblegum Crisis Tokyo 2040.
Which, spoiler alert, this one's higher up on my list.
I kind of figured because it's your genre. So I'm not going to go into too much detail since I know you'll go into it a little bit more. But I will say the reason why this particular series, my 90s anime, I could change the order every single day because it's hard to pick 1 through 10.
Mm-hmm.
This is a great series because, as Advent Nebula will talk about when it gets to his part, is you are watching 4 women who are not warriors by any means become warriors, and they kick ass. Personally, my favorite character is Pris, but
same with me.
But I will let you go on to your next one, and then you could talk about this later.
Which I like to call these next 3 in my list the Girl Power Trio.
Girl Power Trio.
Because it's going to start with Magic Knight Ray Earth at my number 6.
Spoiler alert, this is higher on my list.
So I will let you go into more detail on that one when it gets to you then.
Certainly.
But Clamp has always been authors that I've enjoyed all of their works as they've come out with it. Ray Earth is my second favorite of what they put out. My favorite got released in 2002 with Angelic Layer. So it's gonna, when we do a 2000s list, that'll be on there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Angelic Layer in a heartbeat.
Yeah. But Ray Earth, it's one of those shows where you go into this fantasy world and there's so many characters I just end up connecting with and everything that's going on. Love the fantasy setting. Love the way that they acquire their weaponry, their mechs, which when I was watching the first season, when they got the mechs, just floored me. But it's the second season that ends up just putting it on this pedestal for me in my top 10.
Oh, yeah, no. Second season is what probably makes or breaks the series for me. So my number 6, and I've come to the conclusion, I have a theme for my male lead characters. Because I referenced Monkey D. Luffy earlier. I talked about Carrot Glaze from Sorcerer Hunters. My next series from number 6 is actually kind of very similar to them at the same time. So, I personally love this series. It's called Irresponsible Captain Tyler. It is, the reason I got into this series, kind of backtracking a little bit, is Dark Horse back in the 90s used to release what are called tankobons, or manga chapters, kind of like what we have for regular comics. And they released this series called Outlanders. Very different than the book series that are in the U.S. And it's basically this sci-fi fantasy series where you have these characters, these alien characters that are meshing with human characters, and there's this constant war that's breaking out. And you have, in between it, because shoujo, you have this relationship between a male and female character on 2 sides of a war coming together. Not like Romeo and Juliet, because I hate Romeo and Juliet, but very similar because you are looking at their relationship and their struggles at the same time. So when I found out that there was a series that had the same art style, kind of same storytelling, and it had characters that were just like this series, Outlanders, I was like, oh, I'm down to watch this. I watched Irresponsible Captain Tyler, and I think the best thing about this series is it starts off episode 1. You have this dumbass character who is just hanging out on the ship, doesn't want to work. He is lazy.
We're talking the kind of person you wouldn't want in your employment workplace doing any job.
No, as a human resources person, I would never hire this character ever to save my life. However, he is Tyler, kind of like Luffy. Well, Luffy's not really lazy, but Tyler, kind of similar. He has a very strong sense of chivalry, strong sense of responsibility, strong sense of protecting others. So, you have a lazy person who goes to protect another human being, and due to that, gets to then lead a war-class ship.
He's like
in the middle of a damn war.
The last person you would want in an interstellar war leading a spaceship ever.
No, because he passes off his work onto everyone else, or tries to every episode, and his second in command absolutely hates him.
He tries to flirt with some of the crew members and the bridge buddies whenever he gets a chance.
Yes, once again, I think I have a type when it comes to a 90s male anime lead. The ridiculousness of it is a comedy. But think of Captain Harlock with comedy. And that's what you get irresponsible Captain Tyler.
It's also if you've seen Legend of the Galactic Heroes, it's also in the same vein as a comedy version of that, where you have a major, big political, epic scale war going on, and you have this idiot in charge of a spacecraft.
Yes, and the moment you're like, okay, fine, I'm down. So I committed to watching it, and Kaiju Okami hates me because we were at 90's Con a few years ago, and I saw it for the first time because it was re-released a few years ago, and I was like, I must have it. And he's like, you can get it cheaper online. I'm like, I must have it now. And he's like, you just spent double the price on a DVD copy that you could get for half. I'm like, it's Tyler. Have to spend the money.
Yeah, and it was at the Right Stuff booth too.
Yes.
With it being their flagship title, I can understand.
It is. And it's one of those series that I feel like I'm doing a terrible ass job of explaining a television series, but I don't want to give away the plot because I want you to have the same love, or if not the same love, tell me your love and passion for shows without giving away everything.
Yeah, and with Tyler, you got the 12 episode OVA, and then you got the 26 episode TV series, and they're all connected. It's not two separate shows. It's a continuation of it.
It is. And like I'd mentioned for Outlanders, if you ever get to read any of the old 90s manga series for Outlanders, Captain Tyler had a manga. They're great as well. They actually are on the same vein as each other. It's not like they're two different series or presented in two different ways.
Yeah.
So what is your number 5?
As I said, this is my trio of the girl power shows, and number 5 is Sailor Moon. And for Sailor Moon, yes, there are a few seasons of the 5 seasons that are not as high quality as some of the others, but for me specifically, 2 seasons end up getting this show into my top 5, and that's S and Stars, which have 2 of the best developed plot lines in the series, with S having the entire arc with the Talismans and Sailor Saturn, and then Stars with the Starlights and the Sailor Guardians from another galaxy coming and invading Earth, with Sailor Senshi having to fight those back. And it just was one of those shows that, being one of those that watched it growing up and now getting to experience the re-release after having watched the versions when they were released subtitled in the 90s to get the correct translations, especially what Deke and Cloverfield did with the show when they wanted to appeal it to a mass audience. But it's one of those shows that, as Kaiju no Kami likes to say, it's like a all-girls Sentai series, the way it's packaged. And being one of those that loves the 90s themes of the Monster of the Week and just everything, and the ability to drop in to episodes even with the overarching plot lines, except for in Stars, because that's just one ride that you have to watch all of them pretty much together. The series is just a lot of fun. I enjoy the show. It's one of those that I can pop on at any time, watch a few episodes and enjoy it without having to go in order at times, unless I actually want to do like I'm doing right now, getting into Super S, as I've been going through since late last year, watching the series over again. especially with Stars getting its release here in June with its first time having an English dub.
The hard part about Sailor Moon is that is the first... I would say that's probably the first anime I actually ever watched, knowing it was an anime. Because it aired when I was in high school. And if you didn't hear that, that was on purpose, because I'm trying to hide my age. But it was one of those shows I watched. The reason it didn't come on my top 10 list is, one, I wanted to kind of go a little bit more of the obscure route. Because with Sailor Moon getting the resurgence and the redub, not that there's anything wrong with it. I just kind of thought, in my own mind, I'm like, well, I talk about Sailor Moon so much, let's talk about other shows. Which kind of leads into my number 5 pick. And the reason you say that is because my number 5 pick, the main character actually is as stupid, in my opinion, as Sailor Moon. And this show is Blue Seed.
Oh, God.
Blue Seed is this great show. It takes place in the modern era, and the main character, her name is Momiji, she finds out she is the Kushinada, basically the shrine priestess whose blood can save the world if put into the right hands, or destroy the world if put into the wrong hands.
And somehow every episode she manages to get captured by the bad guy.
She does, and her twin sister, which... when you find out she's so much more on the level, you're like, why couldn't she be the hero? And what I like about this series is it's an action series. It's not a shoujo. Kind of like Sailor Moon. Sailor Moon technically is an action series with shoujo because it is 5 girls fighting. Blue Seed is very similar in that regard. You have an action series where you have this entire group that's military-esque, that fights demons every episode, protecting this one schoolgirl who has the blood to make or break the world. Yeah.
And the monster designs, and they're all plants that come to life too, are very uniquely designed for every single creature they put into the series.
They are very uniquely designed. It was very well done. It's a 26-episode series.
Plus a 3-episode OVA that came out about 5 years later.
Yes. And for the series itself, it is great. You do have elements of romance. You do have elements of intrigue. You have a lot of action. You have a lot of comedy bits. And the other thing that I really like that this series did, I can't say it did first because I've seen it in other 90s animes, but it was the first I've seen it, was called an omaki theater. And that's kind of what sold it for me for Blue Seed.
Yeah, those at the end of the episodes, before the episode previews, are just downright hilarious.
And they don't do them anymore. So, omaki theaters, if you don't know what they are, it's basically like this 2 to 5 minutes little snippet of an episode after the actual episode, either right before the end credits or right after the end credits. And everyone's in SD form. Or super deformed, and they make a mockery of the entire show.
The most recent series to do this that I've seen was Future Diary. Did at the end of theirs where like 30 to 45 seconds would have one.
And the great thing about them is because, especially if you have a very intense or super, super serious episode, because it's not like a Tekkaman Blade or a Bubblegum Crisis where it is meant to be fully intense. This is kind of supposed to be that almost childish-like series. It kind of helped take the levity away from it. To make you go back to, oh yeah, it's still fun, ha ha ha, half the cast died. Not really, but... No, that would be Tekkaman Blade.
More than half the cast of Tekkaman Blade.
But Blue Seed is just, it's a great romp. It doesn't take itself too seriously as an action anime, and it doesn't go too girly that if you want to watch it, let's say as a guy just watching an action anime series, you're not going to feel like you're being talked down to because you're not part of the audience. And that's the one thing I really cherish about Sailor Moon at the same time, is it didn't alienate, as some girl power shows do, the male audience.
Yeah, it doesn't.
So what is your number 24.
And like we were talking about earlier, this was going to pop up on my list a little later on with Bubblegum Crisis Tokyo 2040 coming in at number 4 here. I enjoy this show. Cyberpunk is the genre, and this is my top cyberpunk series of the 90s. It's my number 2 cyberpunk series of all time, of all the cyberpunk series I've watched. And for me, series is anything that's 13 episodes or more. My top cyberpunk is actually a 4-episode OVA with Armitage, but we're not doing movies and short form OVAs for this list. So, no. Bubblegum Crisis Tokyo 2040. The characters of Pris, Nene have just been 2 characters that I have enjoyed watching over and over again. And then Celia, with her character arc, with her father and everything that goes on with the corporation and the involvement she's had to go through so much shit to form this team to take on the Boomer threat. And Mason's probably one of my favorite top 10 villains of all time when it comes down to it. There's just something about the way Cyberpunk writes villains that I just connect to and just love and drool over their power hungriness, but at the same time, they always end up getting the karma they deserve in the end.
They do, and I think what really gravitated towards me on this series, because Cyberpunk is not my genre, like, my extent is this, Ghost in a Shell, and then other sprinklings.
Psychopaths would be one of them
exactly.
for you as well.
And so, I am not as knowledgeable as Cyberpunk, but what I really liked about it, not just the Cyberpunk element, not just the girl with gun element, but for Bubblegum Crisis 2040, which the original is just as good, but 2040 I think is my favorite, is because it does actually give you so much more of an opportunity to connect with the characters, where you actually feel like you are a part of the story, not just witnessing it. Because that's the one thing I like about Silent Mobius, which is on Kaiju's list, is it's not cyberpunk, but it's still that horror-esque.
It's a demonic horror with Silent Mobius.
Exactly, but it's the same thing. It's like you have so much that goes into it, but you have so much character development. And that's, to me, and I know I am looking at it from not like a huge fan, but to me, sometimes certain cyberpunk series, like Lane in my opinion, and I could be completely off, but in my opinion, I felt like there wasn't as much character development in that show as there is in Bubblegum Crisis.
Yeah, Bubblegum Crisis is one of those shows, like she said, you can connect with a lot of the characters in this show. And each one of the individual characters, you're going to find a character arc you're going to enjoy, and you're probably going to find a character you're going to connect with, whether it be the Night Sabers, the AD Police, with the 2 main characters that you have in that, Sylvia's brother, or even Mason himself as the villain.
So my number 4, because that's what we're on, number 4 series is actually one of the animes I think that got screwed over in the US so often. It started with a 4Kids dub, which I don't think the dub was that bad. I've seen worse. And then it never was given a proper English treatment until a newer series just came out. And I can't watch an English dub of a show that doesn't have an English dub. Like a modern English dub versus an older series. And that's Cardcaptor Sakura.
Oh, yeah.
Cardcaptor Sakura, which the reason why this disappoints me is Cardcaptors was released by 4Kids, and basically they cut half the show in half because they wanted it to be able to tailor to boys and girls with Shaolin.
Well, and it's such an interesting one because it was 4Kids distributed it before Geneon took it over, but it was actually the Canadian company Cloverworks which did the Sailor Moon S and Super S that actually is the reason why Cardcaptors got butchered the way
it is. And that's the disappointing part, because they wanted it to tailor to boy and girl audience, because Cardcaptor Sakura, as the name kind of sounds, it's about a main character. Her name is Sakura. And she basically finds these cloud cards that's by this ancient sorcerer called Clow Reed. And with the Clow card, she also gets these magical powers, plus has access to Cerberus or Cerberus. I like how they say Cerberus in Japanese, so that's why I always go with Cerberus, just because it makes no sense to me. And it is such a beautiful coming-of-age story. To me, for a 10-year-old girl who gets these magical powers, has to fight and protect the world, and along the way, she does meet Xiaoran Li.
Which the Cloverworks version wanted to make him the main character.
Which would not work, because there is no way, with the way the original series that was done, he came in probably about a quarter of the way through.
Yeah, so when they were released the first time in the US, they cut out the first 18 episodes.
Mm-hmm. And then you have a third character for magical, not side characters, because you have a brother, you have friends and things, Ariel, who is also a magic user. And it's a great show because the one thing I loved about it back in the 90s when I first watched it is every time she got a new power, when she used a new Clow card, her friend would make her a new outfit. So she had the perfect closet of outfits because her friend was a billionaire, so she could do whatever she wanted. But sadly, when the license expired for 4Kids, because they were the ones who owned the license.
Cloverworks did the work, and then Cloverworks had the second-hand license, which we got.
And that's the reason why, even when 4Kids went defunct, it could never be touched.
And then Cloverworks worked with Genion before Genion went defunct and released it on DVD again.
And they only released it subtitled.
Yeah. And then the new re-release that we recently got is a complete Blu-ray set.
Which is still just subtitled.
It's still just subtitled, and it's expensive as hell.
It is. That's the sad part for Cardcaptor Sakura. If you want the original series, which I think is about 100 episodes and
79 episodes, 2 movies.
It's about $300.
Yeah. And this Blu-ray release that's recently come out that's now available, it does have an English dub on it. It's the Philippine English dub.
Which, from what I heard, is not that great.
It's not.
Now, the movies were dubbed.
And they were dubbed by Genion.
So the movies had a good dub. It's the television series itself, and it's hard when you're watching a 79-episode series to watch 79 episodes in Japanese and then watch 2 movies in English. You can only watch it in Japanese, and when they just made a new Cardcaptor Sakura series that basically, from what it sounds like,
it's a continuation. It pretty much picks up a year after the end of the last series.
End of the last movie, because the last movie was a year after the series. But even that, I can't watch it dubbed because I'm so used to Japanese cast members, and
then if you watch it in Japanese with the new one, they recast everybody.
I know, that's the hard part as well.
For not just the English, but the Japanese was completely recasted.
But I will say Cardcaptor Sakura is, and the reason it's not higher on my list is really because of the fact that it got such a poor treatment. Not that it should be knocked down for that, but it's so hard to be able to watch the series again because there's a huge barrier to entry. You have to have a lot of money unless you want to go for improper means of watching it. And while I don't recommend it, I do recommend watching the series at least once. And if nothing else, watch Cardcaptors. It's not a terrible, unlike One Piece, it's not a terrible rendition of a show. It takes so much of the power out of it because they're not making Sakura the main character as she's supposed to be.
Now, on to my number 3 selection for my top 10. I'm going with 8th MS Team from Mobile Suit Gundam. Probably one of the most tragic of the Universal Century stories Gundam has ever put together. Now, with 8th MS Team, it hits this point because it's such an emotional ride when watching the series. And when you've seen the original Gundam, and you've seen Zeta, and you've seen Double Zeta, going into this show it is even more of a gut punch because you know, we're at this point of the story, just how pivotal of a point in the Gundam UC universe it is.
I like Eighth MS Team. Sorry, I've seen way too many Gundam series apparently.
Yes.
I think like 2 years ago, that's all Kaiji Okami did is we watch every single Gundam. But I like 8th MS Team. I think for me, the ending, which we won't spoil because it's a nice little short series, so it's easy to get to the ending, is probably the hardest for me. But you are right, it kind of plops it right in the middle of the Universal Century universe.
And it's right there in the 1 Year War and Mobile Suit Gundam as well.
Well, and it's hard because with the Universal Century, there's so much that goes on, but it's so hyper-focused, like for the main series, it's usually hyper-focused on Amuro and Char, and then when you get to Zeta, you have Camille. So it's nice to kind of get these snapshots of everyone else, of their struggles, because you kind of forget at times that everyone is struggling.
Yeah, and then another series that's currently coming out right now are the Thunderbolt movies, which are doing the same thing 8th MS Team did, focused on a certain specific point during the 1 Year War, and you're getting this amazing side story of characters that it's like all over again 8th MS Team being told with Thunderbolt, but 8th MS Team just has that place in it that you just didn't see it except for War in My Pocket with Gundam at the time.
Well, the one thing I really appreciated, though, is the fact that even though it is a side story, all the characters are well developed. The story, even though it's part of a larger universe, is still insular. So you kind of feel like you are going through that adventure with them, even though you know the end result. It's not just limited and sitting on the fact of, oh, it's part of this bigger world.
Exactly. I mean, this is one series where I recommend it for somebody that wants to get into the UC Gundam but is turned off by the animation from the older shows to go watch this, because they will want to know the larger picture of the older Universal Century shows that Tomino put together.
Absolutely. My number 3 pick for 90s anime actually is also a Gundam series. I'm going actually from the later part of the 90s. This is actually the final Gundam series of the 1990s and is Tomino's swan song, because it's really, in my opinion, outside of Reconquista, which is more recent, it is the pivotal show that Tomino has ever done for Gundam, and that's Turn A Gundam. And Turn A Gundam for me, outside of what you've seen for Gundam Wing or Gundam 00 or so many of the other series, even G Gundam, this one kind of goes back to the basics. Even more basic than original Gundam.
Yeah, it really does.
Because you have two conflicting factions. You have the Earth race and the Moon race that were split apart by some unknown conflict. And the Earth race is much more, I would say, kind of Renaissance.
They really...
more early Industrial Revolution type area.
Yeah, you really see with this series that whatever happened knocked Earth's civilization back significantly centuries.
Yes, actually it's more Victorian. Because Victorian had the Industrial Revolution of like the late 1800s, early 1900s type of style of world. And it's interesting because when you go into the Moon Kingdom, it's more, it's still not like it's that dramatically futuristic comparatively, but you can tell there is an extreme difference. And when you have the Gundam, so you have the White Doll, as they call it, which is Turn A. And even that is more sparse and simplistic. And you have Zaku's in it. You have so many other types of Gundams. And the beautiful thing about this series, without really spoiling it, is it's a culmination of everything you expect to see within Gundam.
The one thing that really amazes me, this series took so long to come over to the States. When Turn 8 Gundam was put into a contest for the design of the Gundam, was won by an American. Yet we didn't get it over here until 2 years ago, finally.
And that's really it. We didn't see it until 2 years ago. And unlike the other Gundam series, which is probably not a bad thing when you think back to it, think about it, I mean, is for more of the modern Gundam series that have been released in the States, it's never been dubbed. So it's Japanese only, which, knowing some of the dubbed versions of Gundam, it's probably a good thing, because some of the dubs are terrible.
Especially with Hiromi Paku. She nails the lead just out of the park. And anybody who's watched Full Metal Alchemist, I think she does this role significantly better than she did Edward Elric, just because of some of the situations she's put into the script.
Her playing Laurent Seahawk, who is probably for the 90s versions of Gundam, because one of my favorite series of Gundam still is 00 because it's so creative. But for the 90s itself, even though I'm seeing it well after the 90s, I think she plays the most pivotal for a main Gundam pilot, because I've seen all the 90s Gundam series, and I've seen some of the 90s Gundam series in the 90s, and even with the 80s Gundam series, or the 70s when you come to original Gundam. So the progression of how character development was done, I think, for Tomino, really hit the highest point he could ever go with character development, character design, the struggle, classism, even putting real-world conflicts that are relatively reasonable today. And the best thing about this particular series, before we go to our number 2 picks, is there is no villain.
There isn't. Unlike
the other Gundam series, where you have a defined villain of someone, everyone is honest. There's really no bad person, and even the people that you assume are bad, and there are bad people, so to speak, but they're not villainous. They're trying to actually do something for the betterment of someone else.
Yeah, and when you think about it, because this is going to be one term you'll hear a lot, before you get the revelation of it, is the dark history. Mm-hmm. In a way, the true villain of this series is hiding the truth behind the dark history.
That's a good point. It is hiding and then forgetting. Because a great quote, and I always forget who said it, is, if we do not remember our past, we're at risk of always repeating it. And this show, even though it doesn't have that defined villain, really demonstrates that. I think more than Reconquista, but Reconquista, if we go into a Gundam episode, we'll explain why that has its faults. So, with that said, what is number 2 for you?
Number 2 for me, this is going to be a series that's probably on everybody's 90s top 10 list. I was fighting about not including it, but I was like, you know what? It's there. It is definitively one of my favorite series from the 90s, and Cowboy Bebop is my number 2 series. It's one of those shows, anybody who's seen it knows you can go in to the series and drop in on any episode, get to know these characters, but when you watch it in order, because of the way it's developed, it means so much more. Yes, only 8 out of the 26 episodes focus on the main plot, but in a way, it's like you're watching a Western-style show because of that.
And that's very common for 90s anime in general. No matter even if it's Dragon Ball, if it's Sailor Moon, if it's Outlaw Star, it's not... Yes, you have shows that have filler, and the shows that... And the 2 of the 3 shows I named have a lot of filler because of how long they are. But having shows that deviate from the plot but still kind of connect where you are interrelating with the characters is what I think makes it so immersive. And this is the one thing I love about Cowboy Bebop. Even though it's not on my list, it's not due to quality. It's not due to anything outside of the fact that I knew it would be on yours, and I know it's on many of everyone's, like you said. It's just, it's such an amazing show. I think for me, the most lacking thing, admittedly, is we didn't get more.
Yeah, but you really didn't need to, because the show has a very definitive ending when you get to it.
I still think, kind of like so many others, it's still too soon.
Yeah.
But it's a great show, and it recently, a couple of years ago, came out on Blu-ray, which a really nice Blu-ray set,
Yeah,
too.
they have 4 different Blu-ray sets when they initially released it, and then they had a crowdfunded for another version for its anniversary that only minted a certain amount of copies, but its Blu-ray release that Funimation has done for every version has been phenomenal.
Oh, yeah. And the voice acting, even because this series came out in the 90s in Japan, came out in the late...
2001.
Yeah, I was going to say, it was dubbed still during the early days of anime dubbing. Still has a phenomenal voice cast.
And Mary Elizabeth McGlynn, who was the voice director of the English dub, said it was kind of an accident. Everybody that got put together in that, she was actually impressed it came together as well as it did.
And every voice actor I have had the chance to meet who has been in the show, including McGlynn, who directed it, they absolutely love the show, love the experience, and love the opportunity. And for me, that says a lot about a project, is that everyone is still so connected to it.
It's one of those that the English dub in Japan is considered to be equal to the Japanese version, which says the quality at the time that this dub, and I really truly believe that this is what set the standard for voice acting that we have, and people keep having to raise the bar because this one set that bar.
Oh, yeah.
So, what is your number 2?
So my number 2 pick, it kind of broke my heart when Kaiji Okami actually reviewed it this year for another fan. So it wasn't like even though it was years and years and years of me hounding him to actually watch that, it kind of broke my heart when he reviewed it because he didn't see the same love I have for it. This is one of those series that I have seen so many times that I even hear a snippet of the opening song sung in Japanese or English, because it's the same song just translated. I am so excited. And that is Magic Knight Rayearth.
So I have it at number 6 and you have it at number 2.
Yes. And the reason for that is this show did so much for me. While I was always a fan of Sailor Moon because it was one of the first animes that was publicly on TV when I was younger, and I will not say how old I was because I wasn't as young as many of the people I've talked to who've seen it. When I saw Rayearth a couple of years later, first time on VHS, which was dub only, and it was fantastic because even though it's a 90s dub and it's a cliche 90s dub, it's still better than many of the other 90s dubs that have existed.
I think you gotta chalk it up to husband and wife, owners of Bang Zoom Entertainment, Keiko Sakamoto and Eric P. Sherman. They actually translated the script very accurately from the Japanese, so it held the camp when they did it as dub.
It did, and the people that they chose to do the English voice cast for, Hikaru, Umi, and Fu, as well as all the other side characters, really helped make that show, because while the first season is nowhere near as strong as the second season, I think anyone who is a true fan of the show can admit that.
Yeah, Nova doesn't come in until the second season. He's probably my favorite character.
Same thing with Lantis. Lantis comes in second season. There's so many spoilers around who he is, so I'm not going to mention that if you've never seen it.
Eagle, my other favorite character, doesn't even come in until the second season.
And so the first season's great because I think of this first season as like your D&D romp where everybody is coming together, building their weapons, building their classes, building their powers. And then the second season is kind of like what you do after you beat that first villain.
It's pretty much your actions have consequences.
Well, and that's the best thing about Magic Knight Rayearth. And Clamp, I think, outside of Angelic Lair, which is a 2000s anime, which we'll have to do one of these for that, they did such a fantastic job. Kind of like with Sakura, and so both of those series really demonstrated Clamp's ability to do a great writing job.
Yes.
And I know there's so many other series that people can talk about. You have Tsubasa Chronicles, you have X, but
Holic.
yes, but for me, Ray Earth really demonstrates great storytelling, great characters, and just so much love for a fantasy genre.
Yeah.
Especially when you take in so many different elements. So finally, last but not least, we are getting to our number one picks.
Yeah.
And just so you know, our number one picks are, once again, just like the rest of the list, our own selections. They're not to say these are the best series in the known universe, because if that were to be the case, then we'd be controlling the world, which is not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, especially when we look at our number one picks.
I know. So starting with you.
Yes. So, my number one pick, this is one series I kept hearing about. I had been a fan of Kashimoto, who was the director of this series when he did Sailor Moon S, Sailor Moon Super S. But the first chance I got to watch this series was when I was in college. Where I went to college, it was mandatory you had to take a gender study course. And our professor introduced us to Utena. And Revolutionary Girl Utena hits the number one spot on my list for just how innovative it is. The cinematography, the voice acting in the Japanese. I do not recommend the dub, even though there are several veteran actors in there that you go, oh, that looks like... No, don't watch the dub. It was very early New York Post dubbing era with Sam Riegel, Crispin Freeman, and Lisa Ortiz. But the Japanese acting is phenomenal. The art direction. And just the... I'm going to take every single one of these tropes, throw them on their head, and just make it so they go in directions that you are not going to expect at all. The idea of a woman wanting to be a prince. The damsel in distress that just ends up becoming a weapon for anybody gets thrown on its head. All of the male leads all have their own motive. Both of the other female leads in the show have their own objectives and what they want. And it's just taking the concept of relationships, love, everything just thrown on its head in a time in the mid-90s that you just wouldn't see this coming out of Japan. Hell, you wouldn't even see this coming out in modern storytelling for the most part.
No, I don't think if it wasn't made in the 90s, I don't think Utena would have ever been made into an anime series. And only because even nowadays, where we have so much more openness for gender equality, for the LGBTQ community, there's still that fear or hesitation to highlight it. And it's not saying that we don't have a ton of strong female characters. We even had it back in the 80s and 90s when you think of Ghost in the Shell, or even currently when you look at different series. I think Junko Makishima is a strong female character. Because yes, she's psychotic from Danganronpa, but she still represents so much. But I don't think Utena would have ever been made, mainly due to the fact that it can make you feel uncomfortable. And not uncomfortable on a hetero versus homo or pan or bisexual, but just uncomfortable because it really is forcing you to make considerations that you don't want to make.
Yeah, because this series doesn't just touch on that. It touches on incest and other very taboo topics that makes a normal person going into the series that would feel very uncomfortable.
Well, and I think it also plays upon the fact that some of the male characters are represented honestly.
Yeah, they very much are.
And the fact that they have as much weakness in certain areas that the female characters do not have. It really helps you play upon those gender roles. And admittedly, when I first watched it, coming from a person who is on that queer spectrum being bi, I didn't even get it. I didn't even enjoy it. Mainly because, well, one, because I watched the dub, which dub was terrible. And two, because some of the characters, being a bisexual female, didn't even relate to me when I first watched it. It felt like, okay, if you're playing this show where the characters all kind of, they don't fit in a box. And I think in the 90s, when you watch this, or in the 2000s when you watched it, the expectation is that you're going to find somebody who fits in a box and works for you.
Yeah,
and there are so many series that even to this day, Sorcerer Hunters, which I talked about earlier, there are characters in that fit in a box and worked for me as a fan.
Yeah. That's the one thing I do appreciate with Kishimoto's works. At times, especially with S and Super S with the villains, they really, for Sailor Moon, didn't fit in a box. Utena, none of the characters really fit in a trope box. Then his later shows, Penguin Drum, Yuri Yuri Kuma, and he produced Melody of Oblivion. All those series, nothing fits straight in a box for the characters, and I believe he does that writing on purpose.
Well, and I appreciate that. I really didn't appreciate it when I was younger, mainly I think because the world was so much different in the 90s. If you were young in the 90s, maybe not even born in the 90s, the world was different. Being very open and vocal about who you were, acting however you wanted. I was a bisexual goth chick who did not fit any norm because I was smarter than most and more promiscuous than others. And so it's a hard thing to live in. And then when you take being a nerd into that, the fact that everyone has so much more openness in this day and age, I'm jealous of. And Utena was a clear example of what the future held. It really did speak of a time that did not exist when it was made. And it probably doesn't speak of a time that exists now, but a current audience, and I hope you all check it out, can have more respect and more connection with.
Yes. So, for you, your number one pick.
I wish I could say it's as heartfelt and positive as your number one pick is, that you actually, because you actually could bring a great conversation with your number one pick. My number one pick basically is me, but in anime form. So when I first saw this series, it was around the time that I watched a few episodes of Pokemon. So I recognized the voice because the voice is Ash Ketchum. And it's not Pokemon. God help me, it's not Pokemon. That's Avant Nebula shtick, nowhere near mine. But I heard this character who is loud, who is brash, who was trying to do things for kind of a good deed, but mainly for herself.
Are you saying you're Lena Inverse?
Oh, God, yes, I am. Lena Inverse Slayers, if anybody has not heard or seen of this series, is basically about main character Lena Inverse, who, she's really not as horrible as I make her out to sound. She actually is, in certain instances, a good person, but you have to kind of peel a lot back to get to it. She's a dark sorceress, or dark magician, however you want to put it, who goes around and does things for money. Will help save a village, save a house for money. And I think what I love about it is she also does it to help people, but she's kind of like a yandere.
She's in for herself.
Oh my God. And so the best part I like about this series, it's action. It's comedy. It's not really drama, but there can be dramatic moments, especially if you have Gowry.
Gowry, the punching bag of the entire series.
Gowry is Lena Inverse's, I'm going to use the term sidekick, which is probably very true, but insulting to Lena Inverse because she doesn't need a sidekick. He is the personification of what a white knight on horseback is supposed to be.
And they stereotype it up like none other.
They do. They definitely make the two characters so much more like oil and water. It is hilarious. But the reason why I like Lena Inverse, and the reason I love Slayers as my number one pick for the 90s, is because, as I mentioned before when talking about Utna, is the 90s was a weird period. And I know I'm probably making it this dark dystopian past that existed. It wasn't that. It was just the fact that the 90s was much more conservative in public life than it was for like music or entertainment.
Yeah.
Music and entertainment, oh my god, everything was open. Especially because you had like Britney Spears and everything during the later part that really helped for that. But when it came to cultural presentation, the 90s were kind of stiff in certain areas unless you wanted trendy mainstream things. Like going with like Friends or Will and Grace, even though it's kind of ironic to call Will and Grace trendy and mainstream when it's about two roommates, one of which is homosexual and he's very flaming. But still, at that point in time, they made it this trendy narrative. And so having a show that was fun, that you didn't give a shit about because your main character is evil incarnate, even though she's loud and brash and does good things.
And the one thing that's nice to see is that you had the 90s series, the light novels are still going, you got the sequels, and they finished up the light novels in 2012 and 2013, and now 18 years since the last publication of the most recent light novel, we're getting a new one in a few months in Japan.
Absolutely. And Lena Inverse has been very popular as a mainstay in Japan, has been very popular in the US. I would say for older audiences, if you're younger and you haven't checked out like many of the series on my top 10 list, I would definitely check out if you can, because they are a little bit more obscure and they're not getting as much love, I wish. But Slayers is one of those series that's still getting tons of love, still getting a lot of acknowledgement out there. And it's just so much fun, so crazy, so hilarious. But at the same time, it doesn't just give you what you want on a silver platter. It's not going to make you think. I can guarantee you, compared to mine and Advent Nebula's, Utna will make you think. Slayers is going to make you have fun, and it's going to be one of those things that's almost like getting a nice hug from a evil friend whenever you need a break from life. And that is one of the reasons why even in the 90s till today, anytime I watch Slayers, I was like, you know what? I feel like I had a break from reality.
And it's so funny. Your number 10 is like the straightforward D&D campaign. It's Slayers. Your number 1 is like the D&D campaign that goes off the rails.
I never actually thought of it like that. I start my top 10 list with traditional D&D and end it with the D&D campaigns I normally played. Wow. Thank you. Because I usually played a chaotic evil druid that did dark magic. Wow, Selena Inverse really is me. I have some concerns now. Thank you. And I'm going to be talking to you next week. I'm hoping, or hopefully next week, or after the convention.
Yeah, with Denver Pop Culture.
Because I want us to do a podcast on bullying and using pop culture to cope with that. And my number 1 pick is Evil Incarnate. So
the laziest Evil Incarnate possible.
Yeah, but that's why she matches me way too well. Procrastination is thy friend. But so those are our top 10 lists. I know I had a hard time narrowing my list down to top 10 because there is so much about the 90s that were great. You have other obscure top 10 shows that could have been on my list, such as Trouble Chocolates.
For me, Master Mosquito barely missed it.
Oh, yeah. There's so many series. And I think that's a great thing about the 90s because they were the golden age of anime. I understand it's a little reverse than what it is in like comic books because the golden age is much older, but the 90s really helped make anime not really mainstream. Yes, you have your mainstream series, but it really made it where the barriers to entry was not as taboo as it is now. I had to hide the fact that I was an anime fan in the 90s because of the fact that, for me, especially as a younger teen in the earlier 90s, all of my cred would have been lost. I could not have been able to save face. And I know that's a terrible, terrible, terrible thing to say.
But it really is the truth. It wasn't until Bebop hit its popularity that really people started to appreciate it on a more mainstream level.
Exactly, where they looked at it as, oh, you're just a person watching cartoons way out of your age range. And so, like when mentioning Utna, I'm so jealous of the way the world is that you can be more free and more open comparatively, even with pop culture interests. But at the same time, if not for the fact that so much came out in the 90s, I don't think we would have half of what we have now, if not for that.
Yeah, and now the market's just oversaturated at this point.
Yes and no, but I think in a way, remember 90s Friday Night TV?
Yeah.
Step by Step, Family Matters. I was about to say Family Members, but that took my brain to
Full House.
Full House. You had so many shows, and I think kind of what anime is doing is almost like what they did back in the 90s with all those TGI Friday type shows, is they're putting so much out there that it can connect with whatever audience is interested.
And they're now looking at it more at an international level than just in their own cultural bubble now, because they realize they can make overseas money now.
Well, exactly. And I think, and it's all thanks to you. Yes, us 90s kid had a part in it, but if it wasn't for the endurance of future generations, and I say you, like, I don't know what age ranges you are, so I'm kind of being assumptive, but all of us together is really what forced anime to take the impact it has now.
Yeah. Well, this has probably been our longest episode so far.
And thank you for staying tuned.
Yes. We're going to check out the therapy chair for now, and we'll be back actually pretty quickly with our pre-episode for Pop Culture Con, Denver Pop Culture Con, that is.
Yes. We will definitely check up with you sometime, hopefully in the next few days. And then just expect a lot of different podcasts and probably some on-video work from us from the therapy chair while we're at the convention.
Yes. And with that, we wish you adieu.
Bye!